Halo Infinite's campaign had surprisingly good reception from the Halo community. Of course, there's stuff to be improved, but for the most part, Halo fans think it's good, and that's pretty refreshing. But there are two ways to look at this campaign. From a thirsty Halo fan standpoint that hasn't had a game in 6 years, and from a critical standpoint. And I think that the campaign has a lot of problems and areas that can be improved. Everything from the level design, the open world, the enemy design, and the story. There's obviously a lot of good here, and I think I have ideas on how to make it better. So here are some ideas that I think would do well for the next open world campaign, Halo Infinite expansion or DLC. Now, to start, let's talk about the open world. Halo Infinite's open world was received very well because it was an open world. Halo and open world is a very good combination, it's obvious. However, the open world itself is really not that good. And the reason for that is the variety, all right? Halo Infinite's open world is filled with identical structures, all right, copy and pasted objectives, and only one biome. This is probably the easiest improvement to explain, so I'll go over it quickly. Now, this really is just a matter of like putting in more effort and spending more time in development, but some ideas for more variety would be like bring in more military structures for the Banished. Like, how about some Banished spires, like spires from Halo Reach? How about some Banished versions of them where you have to take them down, or some scarabs under construction, stuff like that. They also have to embrace Zeta Halo. Like, it's like the most historic Halo ring, and they don't really have like anything. It's pretty much just a destroyed ring. Like, how about some ancient humanity structures? Like, I think they should be more abundant, How about explorable foreigner cave systems? That would be awesome. And make the world more alive, Bring in interactable wildlife. Of course, most of the opportunity for more variety in every aspect of the open world would be to introduce more biomes. And I think the three most important biomes for Halo would be like snow mountains, deserts, and jungles. Of course, too many biomes close together would be kind of ridiculous, so here's my solution, Firstly, introduce weather patterns that are like over the top, because like rings have weather systems, and this destroyed thing should be like kind of all over the place, Restrict snow to only being on top of the mountains, and then have 3 to 4 islands just like the open world we have now, and give each of those islands their own biome. More variety in structures and objectives would also come from more biomes, like desert buildings in deserts, right? Like igloos in snow, maybe. This really is just about putting in more effort, so really the solution is just more variety, So now let's talk about the levels, the linear levels. Now, first of all, let's just get it out, like the most obvious thing out of the way. The lack of variety problem also really, really plagues these levels. Like, it's probably what, like the most it like plagues. Like 90% of Halo Infinite's levels are just foreigner hallways. I thought a lot of them were pretty cool because, I like the history, but somebody who doesn't care about Halo lore is going to think it's really lazy. And I kind of agree to an extent. And I think that the foreigner stuff has to be like more explorable, like to the open world next time, like more focused in the open world. The levels have to be varied and memorable. Like, Halo Infinite's levels just kind of mesh together. All the foreigner ones, they just kind of mesh. I don't think there's one person yet who can actually like name each like foreigner level from like just scenery alone. And yeah, but yeah, man, the levels have to be more varied and memorable, and that usually comes from setting and atmosphere. We should not be able like to see that many foreigner hallways in the next campaign. Or if we do, style them up, maybe if the foreigner systems are in a jungle, show us the vines growing on the walls or water leaking from above maybe. The ring being destroyed has a lot more potential than just like hexagons or different islands, But yeah, just more variety, I think a level in space with aircrafts would be cool. A level within a human ship would be throwback, or maybe just huge sequences, like huge scripted moments, like to introduce the objective, like the Spire and Halo Reach, They don't just come from atmosphere. They also come from like just sequences, It doesn't just have to be like different like settings, Also, the problem with Halo Infinite's lack of memorable levels comes from the freedom the player now has. You can just walk into levels with rocket launchers, so focused levels are no longer a possibility. Restrict the player's freedom to give us a more focused experience, Sometimes our grapple has to be taken away, dude. Like, give us a sniper in a stealth focused level, alright? I think the freedom is okay for the open world, but linear missions have to be more controlled. Now guys, let me take a break and talk about game design. Alright, so in Donkey's Best of 2020 video, he said that making a good shooter was not rocket science, right? It's make the enemies move more, make the player move more, make the player think more. He then went on to say that the grapple hook in Halo Infinite was the series' biggest innovation in his Halo Infinite review. This is a very important point because on one hand, grapple hooks seem to be like very trendy and people don't want Halo to become the game with grapple hook. But on the other hand, the grapple hook gives so much to the gameplay experience that people don't want to see it go, you know? And the reason I find it so interesting is because none of this is true at all. The real goal of a game is to make the player think more. Of course, this is not done by just making the player and enemies move more. That may be true for Doom, but not Halo. The enemies do have a lot of tactics in Halo Infinite, but the grapple hook sometimes takes away a lot of the strategy of the game. You are no longer calculating at every given second. You're not thinking about how many enemies have sight on you when you're trying to get a power weapon a few meters away, because you can just grapple it. An enemy is above you? Just grapple it. There's a Banshee? Fast and low? You're really gonna have to buckle your pants for this one, dude. Grapple it. Real strategy doesn't come from more mechanics, it comes from the level design itself and how it's presented. You don't really think about a lot of your decisions when you have the grapple hook and all these abilities. Sure, there are moments in the campaign where you have to cycle through the abilities and that is awesome, but most of the time, you don't really have to get creative at all. This is why I still think Halo Combat Evolved is the best when it comes to the level design. You don't have a grapple hook or advanced mechanics, but you do have to think a lot about your decisions. Developers have to think of how the level is structured to maximize the strategy that comes with overcoming the obstacles presented. They will have to take your power weapons and equipment away from you, but it will be worth the more fun experience. So now obviously, purely focusing on constructing level design to fit the mechanics and maximize the strategy is perfect for the game right now. But expanding the game could open the possibilities for even more strategy. Alright, for the next campaign, the vehicle sandbox, the weapon sandbox, and the equipment sandbox has to be expanded. For one, the vehicle sandbox is probably one of the weakest parts of the game, like straight up. The only truly interesting addition is the Razorback, but that's about it. There has to be more vehicles to fill their roles in the sandbox. Like, where's the co-op air vehicle? Like, not even just for players, but like for Marines. Where's the passive Jeep or Scout Warthog? The vehicle sandbox doesn't have to be perfect, and honestly, it would benefit from just adding anything that isn't complete garbage. Then we go to the weapon sandbox, which is actually like really good, but can be expanded, especially when it comes to how it interacts with the enemy sandbox. So to start, the plasma pistol has to do EMP damage, like it just has to. We also need a stun plasma rifle, energy-based looping projectile rod cannon, fuel rod cannon, and just calculated new stuff, you know. I like the way they're doing the sandbox where every addition is like calculated, you know. And when it comes to how the weapons interact with enemies, the Banish are probably like good the way they are, you know. But the Sentinels are not. They all just kind of have like a really hard to miss weak spot, and pretty much any weapon can exploit it. Please bring back the plasma damage to them. Also, the Harbinger and Skimmers feel a lot like just Covenant because I don't really see a difference when I fight them, you know, because they're kind of just like more aliens. You know, Skimmers might as well just be flying grunts, and the Harbinger was a boss fight, so no comment there. I feel like they should be more vulnerable to a specific type of weapon or weapon combination. And the equipment sandbox is just up to the strategy. I have no idea what they could add. Maybe put more of a focus on neutral mobility equipment like the gravity lift or a mobile man cannon. Maybe a turret if done right. You can bring back that armor lockup from Halo 5 and balance that into Infinite. There's a lot that can be done, but I feel like the equipment could help with the levels and the strategy of them in this game a lot. Like stealth equipment for a sniper level, or an EMP dagger for like big vehicle levels. It's really just up to what the levels want. Now, there's a lot of things that Halo Infinite does right, like the enemy design. All these guys are just more reactive than ever, and it is a blast to fight the Banished. But obviously, the biggest problem with Halo Infinite's enemy design is the encounter design. all of the time, dude, the enemies are just standing there, not really doing anything at all until they see you and then they start shooting at you. One of the best parts of Halo is the tactics the enemy would use to surprise you. The enemies would all have a purpose for being there. Having this bland encounter design makes the game feel repetitive, like a repetitive corridor shooter, and that is just never good. However, the game did surprise me many times with how good the actual AI and the reactive tactics have become. Brutes can now throw grunts at you, enemies will jump on a moving warthog and try to hold on as they try to hijack you or a marine. Jackals will flip their shield and mount themselves up. It's the little things like this that made the combat more dynamic. And I think they should just do more of these things. You know, some ideas I have would be like maybe when a brute jumps on your moving warthog, they can try to rip one of the wheels off instead of hijacking. Maybe brutes can wear grunts on their back to gain a 360 advantage. Just impress me again 343 because it was awesome. But yeah, other than that, the Banished are really good. Now, factions are another big important part of Halo, and this game kind of suffers from it. For one, the UNSC is just almost non-existent in this game. Like, I'll talk about this more in the story section of this video, but like, seriously, dude, all it is Marines, and that's it. We get no Spartan 4s, no ODSTs, or any vehicles because the Marines can't even drive vehicles. Like, dude, that's a problem, alright? This really highlights the one factionitis that this game has. Like, dude, Sentinels don't even attack the Banished. Like, really? So, in Halo the Endless, or whatever the next DLC is, there has to be a way bigger focus on the UNSC as a faction in gameplay. And for the enemies, there has to be at least one other faction that goes against both the UNSC and the Banished, whether that's the Endless or the Flood. This might not seem like much, but it adds so much to the gameplay and the scale of the battles. In Halo 2, you had Elites versus Brutes, right? Covenant versus Flood versus Sentinels. It was awesome, you know. I think it's a given that Sentinels should be both expanded upon in this next campaign and made their own faction. And that leads into my next point, mini bosses. Now, boss fights are like scripted sequences, but what I'm talking about are just like the bigger enemies, all right? Like Scarabs or those big Sentinels. I think they're called like the Enforcers. It honestly isn't much other than the fact that there's nothing like this in Halo Infinite. Only like Hunters, but that's it. I think mini bosses should be expanded upon. Some feedback I can give with the Phantoms would be just like give them the power core that you can destroy, you know? Because right now, Phantoms are just kind of like big bullet sponges with no real technique. So making them Scarab type guys would be beneficial. Like maybe even Flood Juggernauts, dude, please. So now we get to the story. Now this is going to be a hard part of the video because they obviously already have like a direction for the story to be taken in. So I'm not going to give ideas on that. I think the improvements that will have to be made for the storytelling in the next game will have to come down to a few points. Villains, military focus, themes, and scale. Of course, also characters, but I think 343 did a good job with Halo Wars 2 and Master Chief and Brohammer. So to start off with military focus. Now this is probably the most important part because it's what was missing from Halo Infinite the most. Master Chief should just not be treated like a superhero, dude. Like, I get that he's important, but he's just a part of the UNSC, alright? So we need a military in the next game. Alright, whether that's Lasky and What Remains of the Infinity, or the Spirit of Fire, it just has to be something, like commander and troops, you know? The story also has to take some focus on calculated operations and military tactics. This will help with the faction problem, so yeah, no downside I see with doing this. Next, themes. The best Halo stories, and stories in general, are forged by character and themes. You know, Halo 2, Halo 4, Halo Reach, all these stories stand out to me because of their powerful messages. Halo Wars 2, Halo 3 ODST, and Halo Combat Evolved, they're all great games with great stories, but they don't have the most in-depth themes and messages. I think Halo Infinite did a great job with Master Chief, and I only bring this point up to remind 343. I could definitely see them just brushing this aside. Next up, scale. Now I bring this up right now because it feels like the Halo universe is very small. You have the Banished in control of everything, and then two major armies of the UNSC forces, Master Chief and the Spirit of Fire. Don't play the stakes too much because it makes them seem unrealistic and kind of dumb. The galaxy is a big place, and you cannot just be out here telling me that humanity is wiped out, dude. This also ties back to the villains, but we'll talk about that next. So yeah, it's no secret that Halo Infinite's villains, like, the writing kind of blow, you know? From a story standpoint, I like Adjutant Resolution, but that's it, and he's not even a real villain. So firstly, let's just get it out of the way that 343 needs to give their villains more active roles instead of just sitting back the entire time. Like, the amount of hologram messages was just embarrassing. I think the military focus would also help, because this Bowser approach to villains is just not done well and just does not work. Maybe Eshram could have massacred a UNSC encampment or something. Maybe the Harbinger could have shown some sort of emotions with their goals of releasing your species. Just like something, please. But what I really want to talk about with the villains is Atriox. Obviously, whatever villain they introduce later has to have like a clear motivation that they are passionate about acting towards with an active role in the story. But I have some ideas for Atriox, because I think it's pretty clear that he's going to be like the big bad of Halo from now on. So how do you make him a good and interesting villain? Thanonize him. Now, let me explain. In the MCU, Thanos was already known to be the big bad since the Avengers. And up until he took action, he was just a guy waiting in a chair with some normal one-liners. Pretty much all of his characterization happened in Infinity War. He went from being big bad blue guy to one of the best characters in the MCU. How? With the personal motivation that makes sense for him to relentlessly go after. A real indication that he genuinely believes that he's doing the right thing. And of course, an active role in the story. And the outline really is that simple. It just all comes down to execution. And this all kind of ties back into what I consider to be the best scene in the movie, the arrival on Titan. Now, this is just a very well written scene with really good timing and with the delivery, the music, the visuals, everything. But notice how well written Thanos was in the scene. So what if we were to replace him with Atriox? Now, of course, I don't want to rip off this scene, but you notice how Thanos is handled here. He isn't just destroying everything off the bat. The sight of his planet, his motivation, puts him in a state of reflection. And when talking to Doctor Strange, he explains himself honestly. He probably knows he won't be able to convince him, but he still shows what he stands for. Calm and collected, not bloodthirsty, with a compelling motivation that is personal to him. So let's paint the picture with Atriox. So obviously, Atriox got his planet destroyed by Cortana, but I don't like how people are using that as a reason for Atriox being against humanity, because I think that's weak, alright? I think his motivation should be focused on what led him to become the banished leader. The unfairness of war with how the Covenant treated him and his people. With his motivation, making it clear that he's doing what he thinks is best for the universe. Don't make him a shallow tyrant who wants brutes to rule or himself to rule. Give him a personal reason for all that he has done, because he should be against tyrant leaders because of the Covenant, and the destruction of his planet also being a negative effect of power-hungry Cortana. You know, maybe he's trying to use the Banish for a goal that he thinks will be best for the world. Now, who would be the Doctor Strange in this scene? Now, obviously, Doctor Strange was a good choice because of his delivery and his maturity, but how about somebody who can really connect with Atriox and bring out emotion from him? How about Arbiter? A talk between these two to show not only how Arbiter thinks of his story, but also how Atriox thinks would be just perfect, dude. Arbiter would obviously be more experienced and more clear with thought because of his species that didn't just get instantly endangered. Their mirroring qualities would bring out so much emotion in Atriox as he explains himself to Arbiter. I have a lot of good ways the scene could play out in my head, but to Thanonize Atriox like this, I think would be very good for the character, dude. And for those worries that it could just rip off Infinity War, nah man, it's just two guys talking. And if you're really concerned, just look back on the best scene in Halo 2. This is almost meant to be. So yeah guys, rounding up everything, these are the areas I think 343 has to improve for their future Halo campaigns. Obviously that Atriox talk was more for the future campaigns, but honestly all the points can be considered for future campaigns, not just the next one. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye. And actually guys, sorry guys, I literally forgot the most important thing that I wanted to say in this video. Everything else is kind of useless compared to this one. The one thing that the next Halo Infinite campaign needs is skinny boots.